We were committed to digging up the data of deaths associated with Hurricane Maria for two main reasons. From the beginning, it was obvious that the discrepancies from the government's official list and what we were hearing on the street from our sources, it was a very big discrepancy. So we knew that we had to look for this information in other ways, um, different that from the government's official death toll, because we were hearing from hospitals and first responders and NGOs that something was happening and that too many people were dying but weren't being counted. From day one, we kept hearing from radio stations and news broadcasts people saying that their family members were dying and nobody was picking them up. There were no ambulances and things like that. So we knew it was a big issue, right? And another thing is that it is very different when you, as a reporter, are also going through the disaster that you are covering, right? So it had an impact on us, and we also had family members that we didn't know of for a week after the hurricane, maybe 2 weeks. So we were part of our community that was struggling with knowing what was happening with our family members. So that I think that those are the two main reasons why we like concentrated ourselves with those stories. What we started doing was um, collecting all the missing persons reports from the police, right? And some people posted them on social media on their own, and we went to funeral homes, and we went to the municipalities town halls, and we went to citizens residents and started gathering our own very artisanal database of what the government was saying were the deaths associated to the hurricane and the information that we had. And from the beginning, the government had 16 people, and maybe we had 45, right? And so we knew that we had to keep collecting this information on the ground so we could prove that something was happening, that the government wasn't counting some of the deaths. And so after we did that, we started asking for the death records of those months, those 3 first months after the hurricane, September, October, and November, from previous years. And also from that year. And we compared with a comparison, right? And the previous years, its number of people died, and in 2017, it was much bigger. So those extra numbers meant something. And we reported on that, and we wrote and published our first stories, mainly done by Omaya Sosa Pascual and Jennifer Wiskovich, who were the lead reporters on this. And after that, we wanted something bigger, so we started doing a Google form publicly, so people could give us their testimonies on the issue. Well, I think that it is important to use visualization, especially in stories like this, telling the story of the Hurricane Maria's death toll, because visual publications have a deeper impact, right, on people's mind. We live in a very visual society. Everything is digitalized. So when you see a map that is geocoding the events that are happening and where people are dying and where the government is not going, right? And you can relate to the lack of access to medical services, the lack of communication with the local agencies, then people see themselves in the story, and they can validate what you're writing, and they can also become a source, right? Because they see this information in a map, and they say, wait, I'm from there, and if that happened there, maybe other things happen, so I'm going to dig up on my own, and I'll get back to you, right? Also, at the very beginning, we created very simple charts and line graphs showing the discrepancies between previous years and 2017. And even if you wrote a 10,000 word story on what's happening, it is not the same to see for yourself in a chart, in a graph, in a line graph, that the gap between what happened before the hurricane and what happened after the hurricane is so huge. And also a comparison between the numbers that the government was saying in their press conferences and the information that we gather on our own. It was very, very, very different. And it is important to see that, because I think that it explains itself, right? This is the information, this is what's happening, and you can see it to validate it yourself. After publishing our first stories, we decided that it was time to sue the government, right? Centro de Periodismo Investigativo made a collaboration with CNN, and we wanted to sue the government over a specific public record, which is the database that contains all the deaths that happened in Puerto Rico. I think that that was a very important issue for us as journalists, because it would be better to do our job. We will have the whole information, right? And we could do our research, having that official confirmation, and we could prove our point that people were dying not because of immediate causes of the hurricane, but because of long-term events like the lack of electricity, pollution of water, etc. And so with the brilliant work that the legal aid clinic from Universidad Interamericana did, we were able to sue the government. That first case lasted, I think, like 6 months. And on June 2018, the government lost the case, and the judge ordered them to give us the death registry database. And that was something, it's both painful, because you can't ignore that you are reading members of your communities, right, deaths, and you are reading Puerto Ricans' deaths, and you're going through their circumstances and their names and family members. So it's painful, but it's also very huge in terms of having access to the main source of information and being able to do a wholesome investigation around our thesis. And yeah, and after that, we had access also to the death certificates, which was like a whole new ball game, because the death certificate has all the information, right? And we could read that even the doctor said this person died because didn't have a proper oxygen, due to lack of electricity. And so the physicians were proving our points. And that was a huge moment. And again, it was the result of a brilliant and generous job from the legal aid clinic at the Universidad Interamericana, and the support, obviously, of CNN. And I think that we are very proud still of that decision. I think that the first impact that this investigation had from the public, for me, I see it as a sense of validation of their own experiences, right? We still, until early 2020, the government had not changed the official number of the death toll, even though they did their own investigation. And so I think that people felt validated, and they got a sense of justice of what they were going through, right? And so even if some of our readers didn't understand in the beginning why we were suing the government for this death registry, because it sounds so abstract and so concrete at the same time, after we published our investigation on September 2018, on the anniversary of Maria, the first anniversary of Maria, I think that people got it. Like, yeah, okay, this is important work, because it's an independent study done by journalists that are telling our stories in the way that we felt it should be told, right? Like I think that Puerto Ricans felt validated, and it's also a way to get some kind of closure of the strugglings after the hurricane. In terms of the impact that it had for the government, well, the government had to accept the wrongdoing, and they had to talk to George Washington University, I believe it was, and ask for a study and a report on the death toll of the hurricane. And after a year, I believe, and I'm not sure, they had to accept, even though the official list was still 64, they had to accept that the estimate was that almost 3,000 people died from this event. So it was important for us to see that Puerto Ricans felt they had some kind of justice after this. They felt heard, and also the government had to step back and say, wait, okay, so we see the evidence. Let us, do our own study and see where this goes. And where it went, it was to validate what we were saying from day one. The visualization that we did for the investigation of the leaked documents of a chat that the former governor, Ricardo Rosselló, had with colleagues and close consultants was very powerful, I believe, because, well, first of all, it was powerful because it was a visualization that we used for the reporting itself. My colleagues Omaya Sosa and Luis Valentin were reporting and talking to sources, and they asked me to go through public records and visualize what I was seeing in terms of contracts that some agency had with some consultants and contractors. And so that information, those data visualizations, helped them shape and confirm some of the things that they were hearing and researching on the ground. And so after that, we decided that it was important to do a kind of power players connection map, like relations between people map, because we wanted that it was understandable that this was a huge scandal, right? It was not something of one person saying something not so cool in a chat with some colleagues. It was a scandal of all of these contractors and consultants milking all of these agencies from years, and it was huge. So the relations, the power map that we did at the end, I think it had like 100 entities, 100 circles, and that those circles represented people, agencies, officials, private citizens. So I even though the main thing that people think about is when we publish the leaked chat, the most important thing for me is to realize that those conversations and that investigation, what really represents is this whole universe of schemes and corruption. And it is important that we know who is related to whom and what are they doing with those relations. Well, the immediate follow from that investigation was that the governor had to resign. So that's very powerful, right? That resignation happened not only because of our investigation, but because there was a month of protest on the governor's mansion, and he really felt the pressure. And I think, again, that people were protesting along the way. We were publishing these things, and again, they had the data and the sources and the confirmation of what they felt was a corrupt government. And so the immediate follow after, Rosselló had to resign was also that people understood why it's important to have an independent news outlet, that the whole focus is to investigate and go deeper and not be afraid to tell the truth.